Emily Carter had imagined her wedding day for years. Perhaps not in the fairy tale sense with flowers raining from the sky or orchestras playing softly beneath a canopy of stars, but in the deeply grounded way only a girl raised by a single mother could. She imagined smiles, nervous laughter, her mother fussing with her veil, and her uncle Richard walking her down the aisle. He had been a steady presence all her life, a man of few words but quiet warmth. After her father's tragic death when she was a toddler, Richard stepped in as a mentor, a protector, and in many ways, a surrogate father. Though he never overstepped or tried to replace the man she barely remembered, his presence had always meant stability and love. And so, there was never any question in her mind. Richard would give her away. That morning, the bridal suite in the countryside manor buzzed with the chaos of final preparations. Her bridesmaids darted in and out, stylists applied finishing touches, and her mother, Janet, was adjusting the neckline of her dress with the attention of a surgeon. Emily, dressed in a sleek satin gown, smiled at her reflection. It wasn't just about beauty, it was about reaching a milestone with the people she loved. "Where's Uncle Richard?" she asked casually, glancing at her phone. The ceremony was in 45 minutes. Janet froze for a beat, her hands still smoothing fabric over Emily's shoulder. "I think he's getting some air," Janet replied a little too quickly, her voice carrying an edge of discomfort that Emily didn't catch in the flurry of everything else. "I'll go check on him." But before she could step out, the door opened and Richard entered the room, eyes darting nervously. He looked sharp in a charcoal gray suit, his salt and pepper hair combed neatly. Yet his face seemed strained. He gave a small smile, then gestured to Emily. "Could I have a moment?" he asked. The room fell silent. Bridesmaids exchanged glances before bustling out politely, and Janet hesitated, her expression unreadable, before nodding and following them. When the door clicked shut, Richard didn't move closer. He stood just inside the doorway, hands clasped together. Emily waited, smiling, expecting him to say something fatherly, perhaps emotional. But instead he said, "Emily, I can't walk you down the aisle today." Her smile froze. She blinked, confused. "What?" "I'm sorry," he continued, his voice low but certain. "I thought I could, but I can't. Please don't ask me to explain." "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice rising, panic creeping into her chest. "You promised me. You're the only one I ever pictured doing it. You helped raise me." He looked away, jaw tight. "I know, and I love you, Emily. But I can't be the one who gives you away. Not today. You can't just say that and walk away," she snapped, her heart racing now. "Is it because of Mom? Did something happen between you two?" "No," he said too quickly, almost like a reflex. Then he looked at her, pain visible in his eyes. "I am sorry." Without another word, he turned and left the room. Emily stood frozen, her heart thudding like a drumbeat in her ears. It felt like the floor shifted beneath her feet. She had never seen him like that, shaken, retreating. She turned to the mirror again, but the confident bride she'd seen only moments ago now looked pale and fragile. When her mother returned, her expression was calm, practiced, but Emily could see something flicker in her eyes. "Mom," she said, voice hoarse, "he just left. He said he can't walk me down the aisle." "What is going on?" Janet's lips pressed into a thin line. "He's overwhelmed. He's always been emotional. Weddings, they can stir up things." "Don't do that," Emily snapped. "Don't lie to me. You know something." "What is it?" "Today is not the day for this conversation," her mother said, her voice slipping into that tone Emily hated, the one that shut doors, not opened them. Emily stared at her. "I'm not asking for gossip. I'm asking for the truth." But Janet didn't offer any. She simply stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Emily. "You'll have a beautiful day. Don't let this ruin it. I'll walk you down the aisle if you want." Emily let herself be hugged, but her body was stiff, her mind racing. Something was deeply wrong, something that had been hidden for too long. But the ceremony clock was ticking, and 30 minutes later, Emily walked down the aisle with her mother at her side, smiling for the crowd and for her soon-to-be husband Daniel. Yet inside, her thoughts were with Richard, with his haunted expression, and the crushing sense that something about her life had just cracked wide open. The rest of the wedding passed in a surreal blur. Vows, rings, applause, and dancing, all dimmed by the unanswered questions swirling in her mind. Why had Richard refused? What had happened behind closed doors years ago? And why did her mother look like she was holding something back every time she spoke? That night, while Daniel slept peacefully beside her in the honeymoon suite, Emily lay awake, her phone in hand. She opened old photos. Richard at her high school graduation, carrying her on his shoulders at a carnival when she was 6, giving a toast at her 21st birthday. He wasn't just an uncle. He was something more. And for the first time in her life, she wondered, had he always known something about her that she didn't? She didn't know it yet, but her world had begun to shift. A story buried beneath layers of silence was pushing toward the surface, and everything she thought she knew about her identity was about to be questioned. The morning after the wedding, Emily sat alone on the edge of the bed, still in her silk nightgown, watching the soft gray light filter through the hotel curtains. Daniel was downstairs checking out, giving her space, sensing something was off. She appreciated his patience, but there was a storm inside her that she couldn't name yet. Her thoughts kept circling back to Richard's refusal. It wasn't embarrassment or shyness. He looked haunted. He had said, "I can't do it," like someone who had carried a weight for far too long. She scrolled through her phone and stopped at a picture from the night before, the first dance. Her smile looked radiant, but she knew it had taken every ounce of strength to wear it. Her uncle, the man who had promised to walk her through life, hadn't been there for the biggest moment, and no one would tell her why. On the drive home from the wedding venue, Emily barely spoke. Janet sat beside her in the passenger seat, giving the usual motherly suggestions about what to do with the dress, when to send thank you cards, and who still needed photos. But it all blurred into static. Emily nodded when expected, but her grip tightened on the steering wheel every time she glanced over and saw how calm her mother looked, as if nothing had happened. 3 days later, when she met her cousin Lena for coffee, Emily hadn't planned to bring up the wedding. But as soon as Lena arrived, wearing oversized sunglasses and an oversized hoodie, she flopped in the booth and blurted, "Well, that was awkward." Emily raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Uncle Richard," Lena said, stirring sugar into her latte. "He was weird all night. Honestly, I thought he was going to faint when your mom handed you over at the altar." Emily leaned forward, heart beating faster. "You noticed it too?" Lena nodded. "Of course. My dad's never been great with emotions, but this was different. Like, physically uncomfortable. He barely said a word the entire dinner. I thought maybe something happened between him and Aunt Janet." Emily hesitated, then asked quietly, "Did anything ever seem strange to you when we were kids? About our families?" Lena looked up, caught off guard. "What kind of strange?" "I don't know," Emily replied. "Maybe something about my birth? Or Dad dying when I was little?" Lena frowned, then paused like something just clicked in her memory. "Actually, there was a weird fight once. I must have been 12. I heard my mom yelling at Dad. Something about, how long are we going to keep pretending? And those girls deserve to know the truth." She shrugged. "I assumed it was about one of his stupid lies. He lied a lot about money back then." Emily's breath caught. "Do you remember what else they said?" "No, just that. Then my mom cried for hours and didn't come out of her room. It was the only time I ever heard them say something about truth and girls like that. I figure it was about you and me, but who knows?" When Lena left that afternoon, Emily sat in her car, staring at the steering wheel for several long minutes. The fight Lena remembered wasn't a coincidence. There was something buried in the past, and her mother had every intention of taking it to the grave. That night, she went to her childhood home. The lights were warm, the scent of tea and old books still lingering in the hallway. Janet opened the door with a smile, wearing her robe and slippers like everything was fine. Emily didn't bother with small talk. "We need to talk." Janet's smile faltered. "Emily, can we not do this right now?" "No," she said, stepping inside. "We're doing this now." They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where her mother used to braid her hair before school. The same one where Richard once taught her how to balance checkbooks. It felt smaller now. Emily didn't ease in. "What happened between you and Richard?" Janet stared at the teacup in her hands. "Nothing. Then why did he refuse to walk me down the aisle? Why was he so visibly shaken he could barely speak? Her mother's mouth opened, then closed. She looked like she was searching for the right lie, but no lie would hold. So she said nothing. I spoke to Lena, Emily continued. She remembers a fight between your sister and Richard. She heard them mention truth, and those girls. What does that mean? Janet slowly placed her cup down. Her hands were trembling. I deserve to know, Emily said, softer now. You've kept something from me, haven't you? Janet nodded slowly, eyes moist. Yes, I have. Emily sat still, waiting. Her chest felt tight, like her ribs were clamping down on her lungs. I never wanted this to come out like this, Janet whispered. I wanted to tell you years ago, but I was afraid. Emily's voice was almost a whisper. Tell me what? Janet stared at her daughter's face, then looked away, tears forming now. You're not your father's child. The man you grew up calling Dad. He wasn't your biological father. Emily didn't blink. Who is? Janet's lips trembled. She looked down. Richard. The room tilted. Emily's heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. What? I was in a terrible place, Janet began, voice shaking. Your father and I were going through a rough time. He was always away for work. We were drifting. I was lonely, confused, and one night, Richard came over. He'd had a fight with Susan. I'd had wine. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. Emily couldn't move. Her limbs felt frozen. You're telling me Uncle Richard is my biological father? Janet nodded, now crying silently. I found out I was pregnant a month later. I told your father it was his. He never questioned it. And then the accident happened. The car crash. Yes, Janet whispered. He died not knowing. And Richard? Emily asked, her voice cracking. Did he know? Eventually, when you were about 6. Susan found out first. She forced him to tell me he knew. But she made him swear never to say anything to you. It almost destroyed their marriage. We all agreed to keep it quiet, for your sake. For Lena's sake. Emily stood suddenly. Her chair screeched against the floor. You built my entire life on a lie. I didn't want to hurt you, Janet cried. I wanted to protect you. From what? The truth? Emily's voice was a mixture of rage and heartbreak. You made Richard my uncle when he was my father. You let me idolize him. You let me beg him to walk me down the aisle. And you just watched while he collapsed under the weight of your lies. He didn't collapse, Janet said, her voice barely audible. He broke. Emily turned and walked out. She didn't remember how she got to her car. Didn't remember starting the engine or driving home. She sat in the parking lot of her apartment for nearly an hour, staring at the empty seat beside her. Her life had just changed forever, and yet, the city lights blinked like nothing had happened. People walked dogs, laughed, drove past without knowing the war unfolding inside her. She was no longer just Emily Carter. She was the product of betrayal, the symbol of a moment no one wanted to acknowledge. And worst of all, she had been the last to know. She didn't call Richard. She didn't call anyone. For now, the only thing she could feel was silence. Cold, unbearable silence. The next morning, Emily woke in the apartment she now shared with Daniel. But everything felt foreign, like she was borrowing someone else's life. The air was heavy, her body sluggish. The world outside carried on, horns blaring in the street, neighbors heading to work, the smell of brewing coffee from the bakery downstairs. But inside her, everything had stalled. Her hands trembled as she poured herself tea. Her thoughts looped back to the words her mother had said. You're not your father's child. Richard is. For the first time, Emily felt like an imposter in her own skin. Memories of childhood now felt contaminated. Every birthday Richard had attended, every congratulatory hug, every quiet word of support, was that fatherly love leaking through, or guilt? She couldn't tell anymore. She looked at a framed photo on the counter from the wedding. Her in a white gown, her mother on her arm, Richard nowhere to be seen. A part of her wished he had never come at all. At least, then she wouldn't be haunted by the look in his eyes as he said, I can't. By noon, she had made a decision. She would speak to him, face to face. Not for closure, not for comfort, but for clarity. She needed to see if he could look her in the eye and explain why he had allowed her to grow up believing a lie. Why he had chosen silence over truth. She found his number in her phone, stored simply as Uncle Richard. Her thumb hovered over it. She took a breath and pressed call. He picked up on the second ring. "Emily," he said softly, his voice tired. "I want to see you," she said flatly. A pause. "Of course. When?" "Now." "Okay. Come to the park. The one near the old library." She hung up without another word. When she arrived 20 minutes later, he was already there, sitting on a worn wooden bench under a chestnut tree. He looked older than she remembered. Maybe it was the overcast sky, or maybe it was the guilt that weighed down his posture. His hands were clasped tightly between his knees. He looked up when she approached but didn't smile. Emily sat at the opposite end of the bench. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She watched a young father push a toddler on a swing. The child's laughter rang through the air, sharp and free, while her own heart felt heavy. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a breath, then let out slowly. "Because I didn't think I had the right." "You were my father," she said. "You were my father. Biologically, yes. But I wasn't your dad. Your dad was the man who raised you, who loved you as his own. I was the man who made a terrible mistake and spent years trying not to destroy what little piece was left in our families." "You say you didn't want to destroy anything," she said bitterly, "but keeping the truth destroyed me anyway." Richard looked down. "I know, and I'm sorry. You should have told me. I wanted to," he admitted. "There were so many times I thought about it. Your graduation, your first heartbreak, your 21st birthday. But every time I looked at you, I saw the life you had, a life built on someone else's name. I didn't want to take that from you." Emily shook her head. "You didn't protect me. You protected yourself. And Mom. And Aunt Susan." Richard winced at the mention of his wife. "Susan was the first to find out. When you were 6. You just come back from a weekend at our place. You'd fallen asleep on my shoulder. Susan looked at you, then at me, and just knew. That night, she confronted me. I admitted everything. What did she say? She told me I had one choice. Either we keep the secret buried and try to save what was left of our marriage, or I leave and blow up 2 families. I was already on thin ice with her, so I chose silence." Emily stared at him. "Did you ever love me like a daughter?" He met her eyes. "Yes, always. But I tried not to let it show. I didn't want to confuse you, or Lena, or make things worse. But it did get worse," Emily said, "because now I feel like I don't know who I am anymore. I'm someone's mistake, a secret, something shameful." "No," Richard said firmly. "Don't say that. You were never shameful. The way you came into the world, yes, it was complicated, but you've always been good, bright, loved." Emily looked away, blinking fast. "Then why did you run from walking me down the aisle?" He exhaled shakily. "Because standing there, in front of everyone, giving you away felt like claiming a role I had no right to. I thought I could do it. I rehearsed what I'd say. I thought maybe this was the moment where I could be what I should have been all along. But then I saw you standing there, in your dress, and it hit me. I'd missed it all. The late nights, the bruised knees, the school plays. Your life passed, and I stood on the sidelines, pretending I didn't care more than I should." He paused. "I didn't want to ruin your day with my presence. You ruined it by disappearing." Richard nodded. "I know." They sat in silence again. A breeze rustled the leaves above them. Emily tried to hold back the ache in her chest, but came out anyway, tears that she wiped away angrily. "I hate that this is part of my story now," she whispered. "I hate that when I look in the mirror, I'll see your eyes. I hate that I feel guilty for hating you." "You don't have to forgive me," he said gently. "But you deserve peace, not answers that tear you apart." "I want to hate you," she said, "but all I can feel is empty." Richard's shoulders slumped. "Then I've failed you again." Emily stood. "I don't know what I want from you, but I needed to hear it. From you." He nodded. "I'll always be here if you ever want to talk, or scream, or ask anything." She looked down at him. For the first time, she saw not the strong uncle from her childhood, but a man aged by regret. A man who had lived with a secret that rewrote her entire existence. "I don't know if I'll ever call you Dad," she said, "but I won't pretend you're a stranger either." Then she turned and walked away. She didn't look back, but she heard his quiet sob behind her. It wasn't satisfying. It wasn't closure, but it was real. Back home, Emily curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Daniel returned from work, and she told him everything. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. When she finished, he kissed her forehead and held her until her breathing steadied. That night, Emily stared at her birth certificate. It listed her father's name, James Carter, the man who had died in a car crash when she was 3. A man she barely remembered. She wondered if he ever had doubts, if he suspected, if he would have loved her anyway. Then she picked up a pen and wrote in her journal for the first time in months. She didn't know what the next chapter of her life would hold. But for now, she had a truth, ugly, painful, irreversible. And from it, she would have to build something new. 2 weeks had passed since Emily sat with Richard on the park bench, and still, the emotional dust had not yet settled. She went through her days in a sort of quiet autopilot, returning emails, folding laundry, feeding the cat. But the gears inside her mind kept turning, even when she was smiling or making small talk. The illusion of a peaceful life had been pierced, and the wound beneath it was slow to heal. She wasn't just the daughter of Janet Carter. She wasn't just a niece to Richard Bennett. She was the product of a betrayal, a well-hidden sin, a ripple that had silently altered 2 entire families. And now she was expected to find her way through the wreckage. Daniel had been her anchor, his presence calm and steady, never pushing her to move on, never offering cliches or pretending to understand. He simply stayed beside her, cooking breakfast when she couldn't get out of bed on time and running a warm bath when she stared too long into space. It was his quiet care that reminded her she was still here, still whole, even if redefined. But one morning, as she looked at herself in the mirror, something shifted. She saw her own reflection differently, not through the lens of lies or bloodlines, but as a woman who had survived something, a woman who had been hurt but was still standing, a woman who, for all the pain, still had agency. That day, she did something bold. She called Lena. Her cousin, now technically her half-sister, picked up after 2 rings. "Hey," Lena said, cautiously. "Hey," Emily replied, heart thudding. "I was wondering if we could talk. In person." Lena hesitated. "Yeah, sure. I think we should." They met at a quiet diner between their neighborhoods, the kind with checkered floors and booths worn down by decades of conversations. They ordered coffee and sat for a long time without touching it. "I know everything now," Emily finally said. "About my parents. About your dad. About us." Lena exhaled, nodding. "I figured. I'm sorry you had to find out this way," Emily added. "You too?" Lena said, her voice softer than expected. "I've been trying to wrap my head around it. It's like one day I had a cousin, and now I have a half-sister who shares the same father I never felt close to anyway." Emily looked up, surprised. Lena shrugged. "He's been distant for years. Detached. Now I know why. He was carrying something heavy. I hate that it cost you that relationship," Emily said. "I hate that it cost you your entire identity," Lena replied. For a while, they just sat in silence, sipping from mugs that had gone cold. Then Lena added, "You're still my family. That hasn't changed." Emily smiled faintly. "You too." In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not the erasure of pain, but the quiet recognition that life had to move forward. And perhaps, even if everything else had been built on a lie, this new connection could be real. Later that week, Emily made her final visit to her childhood home. She had told her mother she would come by to pick up a few boxes from the attic, old journals, photo albums, keepsakes she wasn't ready to throw away. Janet had been anxious since their last confrontation, but this time, Emily didn't come to yell or accuse. She came with questions, and maybe a sliver of hope for something salvaged. They sat at the dining room table, just as they had dozens of times before over birthday cakes and tearful conversations. Janet poured tea, her hand still trembling slightly. "I'm not here to fight," Emily said. "I know," her mother whispered. I wasn't sure if you'd ever want to see me again." "I did," Emily replied, "because I want to understand you. Not just what you did, but who you were when you did it." Janet's eyes welled up. "I was a mess, Emily. Your father and I were so disconnected. I felt invisible. Susan and Richard, they seemed so happy, so stable. And then, one night, it just happened. I didn't plan it. I didn't think it would matter. But it did, Emily said gently. Yes, Janet nodded. It did. I thought I could control the consequences. I thought love would be enough to hide the cracks. But secrets rot things from the inside. Emily reached across the table and touched her mother's hand. I don't condone it, but I don't want to lose you over it. Tears spilled down Janet's cheeks. I'm so sorry. For everything I denied you. For everything I let you believe. You gave me a good life, Emily said, even if part of it was built on a secret. They hugged, longer than they had in years. It was an absolution, but it was a beginning. Over the next month, Emily made slow peace with her new reality. She didn't rush to rewrite her last name or reframe her identity. She didn't need to call Richard Dad to accept that a part of him lived inside her. But she did start therapy, where she unpacked the pain and confusion piece by piece. She wrote letters to herself. She read her childhood journals. She let herself grieve the version of her life she'd believed in. And eventually, she learned how to live with both stories, the one she grew up with and the one she had just discovered. She met with Richard again, this time on her terms. They walked by the lake near his home, and he told her about his youth, his regrets, the night her mother had called him with the news. He didn't try to justify himself anymore. He simply shared what he could, grateful she wanted to hear it. One afternoon, she invited him to lunch. It was casual, no big gesture, just two people rebuilding trust. He brought an old photograph she'd never seen. Her, aged 4, asleep in his arms, her face resting on his shoulder. I kept it in my drawer for years, he said. I never stopped loving you. She didn't cry. She just smiled and whispered, I know. That fall, Emily stood at the family plot where her legal father was buried. She brought flowers, lilies, his favorite, and sat beside his headstone for hours. She told him everything. Her voice didn't break. She spoke to him like a daughter who had carried his name with pride, even if the blood between them had not existed. You are my dad, she said, and no secret will ever change that. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily walked back to her car, feeling lighter. She hadn't chosen the truth, but she had faced it. She hadn't asked for the pain, but she had survived it. And in doing so, she had taken back her story. Back at home, she began to write a memoir, not for publication, but for herself, a way to give shape to the chaos. She titled it The Man Who Wouldn't Walk Me Down the Aisle, because that moment had cracked everything open. And yet, it had also been the first step toward becoming someone who didn't just endure life, but shaped it. Emily's story was no longer defined by betrayal. It was defined by how she rose from it.